welcome to tonight's Monday webinar. This is one of my favorite topics, so I'm excited to share it with you. The topic is magical macroinvertebrates, and if you've ever come to any of our stream programs or river programs, you know exactly what I'm talking about, which might be why you're here. If you don't know anything about macroinvertebrates, that's cool too, because they are fascinating, and I'm excited to share all this stuff with you. So let's get going. So before we get started, if you don't already, I want you to scan that QR code so that you can sign up for our newsletter. It comes out the first Thursday of every month, which means this Thursday it's going to come out because it's almost July already. Can you believe it? While you're doing that, it's really quick, take you about 15 seconds. I'll share our mission with you. It's to conserve Portage County's natural heritage and provide opportunities for its appreciation and enjoyment. So you can probably pick out the most important word there is to conserve, and then my job and my favorite part is to share all this wonderful things with you so you can learn about it and enjoy it as well, and then help us conserve it. So if that was too quick, you can go on the website. I do believe there's still a pop-up there that prompts you to sign up for the newsletter. So you have lots of ways to do it. It's great because it has all of the programs that are going on. So June is over, but July and August are already up on the website, and all the new things about new park openings and other park information is going to be in that newsletter. All right, let's get into it. What are aquatic macroinvertebrates? So if you can break those words down, you know exactly what they are. Aquatic means they spend at least part of their life cycle in the water. Macro means they're big enough to see with the naked eye, and invertebrates mean they don't have a backbone. Okay, a lot of them are insects. There's some other things thrown in there. I put this picture here in this link, macroinvertebrates.org, because I'm going to be referencing it a lot because it's one of my favorite websites. If you haven't checked them out before, I highly suggest you do it. They have lots of information about all the things you can find in our waterways. They have flashcards so you can practice what's going on or the things that you're learning, and dichotomous keys so you can work through identifying the things you find. But I have found it to be a really, really great resource when I'm learning about macroinvertebrates. What is the point? Why are we even talking about macrovertebrates other than the fact that they're just plain cool, right? And when you start learning about them, it opens up a whole new world to you. Because if you look underneath the water surface, right, there's a whole nother universe going on under there. But the important part for us as scientists, as nature lovers, is that macroinvertebrates are bioindicators. So that means they're living things that can tell us the health of an ecosystem. And these are some of the things we're going to talk about. And they range, right, from sensitive to pollution to more tolerant to pollution. And some of this is common sense, right? You know that things that we don't find very appealing, like flies and leeches, right, and worms and maggots, they're going to be pretty tolerant to pollution. They can stick it out and tough it out through lots of things. But the other things, sensitive to pollution, these are going to let us know that something is going on. So in a waterway, when we go to test it, you can do chemical tests, right? They can be expensive, right? You're also using chemicals, but they're also a snapshot. So we're taking this water sample from this point in time from this water source. Whereas when we're talking about macroinvertebrates, these are things that live there every day, right? And we know what we should be expecting to find. And if we're not finding them, that tells us that maybe something happened before we even got there, right? So that's because if something like a pollutant or a toxin got in the water, they're going to say, hey, this isn't hospitable for me anymore. They're going to let go and go downstream and then find hopefully a more hospitable place to live. So that's why we call them bioindicators. And that's really why we want to study them. But you're right, they are just cool. So we're going to spend the next couple slides going through just brief introductions to the things that you might see. Then we're going to talk about how we do it. And by do it, I mean sample for these things. And then we'll do a little activity to practice. Okay, that's good. So I think this one's name is funny, but you might also have heard amphipod or a side swimmer. They are related to shrimp, but we call them side swimmers because they look like a shrimp that got stuck in its side and can't right itself, right? They kick their legs and they move along on their side. So they're pretty easy to identify because they're moving in a funny way. But other ways to identify them, they have these two sets of antennae they are pretty shrimp-like, right? They have all these weird legs and then these projections at the end, right? But the thing to look for with them is to see how they're moving. You've also might also have heard of crayfish, right? Or maybe a crawdad. I've even heard some people call them West Virginia lobster. So whatever you call them, it doesn't matter. They're all awesome. So this picture on the right is one we took at one of our programs. So there's a stream at Shaw Woods in Ravenna Township that has a pretty healthy population of crayfish. Unfortunately, a lot of them are invasive, and we're working on identifying them. I do have a volunteer who's getting really good at it, so it's nice to have her at programs because she can say, "Hey, this one isn't supposed to be here." But even if we find those, they're still interesting creatures. It's fun to watch the kids try to grab them because they don't always know that when crayfish go to move, they move backwards, right? So if you go to grab them, they're going to shoot out right towards you if you're not expecting it. But the last one we pulled up was carrying eggs, so that was really interesting to see. And usually we see them in all different sizes. So this one was pretty large. We have seen some bigger than this, and we've seen some even smaller. So imagine a crayfish that's only about an inch long. So they're pretty cute. And on the same day, we found a big one that was about 4 inches and a small one that was about 1 inch. And both of them were missing their right pincher. So that was an interesting thing that we found that day. We also have sow bugs. So think about your roly-polies or potato bugs that you find in your yard when you're gardening. If you flip over a rock or find a moist spot, or if you're like me, you have a stray bag of mulch somewhere around the yard, if you flip it over, you've created a whole little ecosystem under there. They like it because they're related to lobsters and other crustaceans. They actually have gills. So whether they're these or the ones that we find in our yard, they have gills. So that's why they all kind of look the same. So these are sow bugs that we'll pull up out of the water as well. Okay, this one, uh, you know, not as fun as or as interesting to talk about because we know what they do, right? They do suck blood, right? Which is kind of gross to think about. But this picture I took at the Berlin Lake Trail in the middle of the trail. So our hypothesis is that either a turtle or a raccoon or something that was going in the water had this attached to it, and when it walked across the trail, it dropped. But this thing was massive. And that was the first time I had seen a leech of this size. There it is. Look at it move. So it did find a puddle of water in the middle of the trail. Now, why did it switch to that one? I found a puddle of water in the middle of the trail and it was moving like that. And as it stretched out, it was over 8 inches long, right? So think about that being stuck to a turtle and the size of the turtle that would have to accommodate that. There we go. Okay, but leeches can be attached to a lot of different things, and they are in our waterways, right? Aquatic worms, I put them in here not because they're interesting, but if you do any sort of river monitoring, you're going to come across them. They're probably our most ubiquitous creature and definitely the most numerous. So aquatic worms look just like other earthworms and worms we see around the state. They are a little bit smaller. Sometimes they're red, but they're all over. So if you're going to catch anything, even on a slow day, it's going to be an aquatic worm. Lucky for us, they're pretty easy to identify because they look exactly like a worm. We also have clams and mussels throughout our waterways. You might have seen these come up on shore when we sample for them. Usually we find more clams that are alive than mussels. Most of our mussels actually are eaten either by the raccoons or the river otters that are making a comeback. So it's cool to see these freshwater mussels because they are evidence of the other mammals that are doing really well. But clams come up not as much as the worms, but they come up pretty often as well. And snails, a lot of people I find didn't know that we have aquatic snails. You might see them in an aquarium or something, but we have them in our waterways as well. So you might see them at Shell Woods. I see them in the woods, but we have them in the water just as much. And one thing that we can learn is that by looking at the way their shell is shaped, that's going to determine if they're invasive or not. So if you want to get really into it, you can start studying shells, and depending on which way their shell opens and which way it curves, you can tell if it's an invasive species or if it's a species that's supposed to be there. So that's an interesting point to look for when you're out there. I really like crane flies, right? Some people call them giant mosquitoes, but they're not mosquitoes. They're in fact flies. And you can look here, it sort of does look like a maggot on the right. That's its larval form there before it becomes this adult on the left-hand side. But we come across these as well. And it's a little different because when you're looking for things, usually you see lots of legs or they look maybe a little similar to the adult form when they come out of the water, but these are pretty different. So they're kind of interesting. So black flies are black flies, right? As an adult form, I'm sure you've seen them, but their larval form is, I think, uh, to try to give it some redeeming qualities, for lack of a better word, it's cute. Okay. I know it's a maggot, but it has these little pom-poms at the top. So it's like a little cheerleader of the macroinvertebrates, right? And when you watch the water moving over those, they can be a little bit cute, depending on your definition of it, right? There's beauty in all of nature. It's just beauty's in the eye of the beholder, right? Midges are one that people are confusing now with our mayflies, but they are in fact different species, and even their larval form looks a little bit different. So when they come up, they have these funny little antenna, but they have these long legs, and to me, they look a little bit more like a fly than an actual mayfly. This one usually is a crowd favorite, and people get most excited about this. So if you haven't seen a caddisfly, I encourage you to come out because we pull one up every time we're out there. Okay. So if you can see these two pictures, if you look at the left-hand side of both, you see the little head popping out and the little legs with it. So these creatures have made this little tent or sleeping bag, whatever you want to call it, this enclosure, they've made that for themselves. So they've used silk and either strung these rocks together. These look like little pieces of shell, maybe. We've also seen them made with pieces of leaves and litter on the bottom of the waterways. But whatever they have available to them is what they're going to make their home out of. And if something comes along that's scary or they think it's going to eat them, they can tuck inside of here and then they just blend in perfectly with the bottom of the waterway. I think I have more pictures to show that. Oh, so these ones, we just pulled this rock out of the water, and so it's still wet, but you can see that these little rocks are super cemented together, and these are harder than other ones we've found because like these ones can move around and they walk around. They're kind of cute because if you look, if you're standing on a bridge and you just look into the water and you think, hey, there's a twig walking around, it's usually a caddisfly. But there are immobile caddisflies who make their home and they stay right here on the rock, right? But people have found that they are opportunistic. So they're going to make their home out of whatever they have available to them. So people have collected caddisflies and put in things like jewels and pieces of gold and other glittery, eye-catching things. And the caddisfly is going to make that home because they need to feel protected. So they'll make their home out of whatever they get. And then after the animal passes on, they can take that enclosure and turn it into jewelry. So I've seen caddisfly earrings and caddisfly necklaces, right? Because they can make these little enclosures. And you put a hook through it, and now you have an earring. So that would be an interesting piece to anyone's collection, right? These are also a favorite. With the other ones, when you're looking through leaf litter and you turn it over, sometimes you have to look pretty close for them. But if you turn a leaf over and you come across a dobson fly or a fish fly, you're gonna know it. So this one on the right-hand side was about 4 inches long. And you can see it has a red color compared to the dead leaves that were at the bottom of this vernal pool. And when I flipped it over, I was like, it's a little startling, right? Because you're like, oh, there is something there. There's not a whole lot known about them, but they do have this long body. You can see it is in sections, and then this usually darker kind of shiny head is what we associate with the fish flies. We put them in the same group because they look pretty similar. But this, if you haven't seen it, is a dobson fly. So this is an adult dobson fly. My guess would be a male based on the antenna we see here, how big they are. And this insect was about 3.5 inches long, right, including those antennae. So they're really big. And was right here in Manaway. So they are around, right? But they begin their life in the water. Okay. When we talk about beetles, there's lots of different types of beetles that we can find either in streams or creeks or rivers. But two of the big ones are the predaceous diving beetle that's on the left, or the whirligig beetle that's on the right, which I think both of them have excellent names. The predaceous diving beetle, both as an adult and as the larval form that you see underneath it, you can see these huge pinchers. So they're really good hunters no matter what stage of life they're in, right? Um, and when we look at the whirligig beetles, they're fun, and I'm sure you've seen them. If you look at any water and you see these little things dancing across the top, making these swirls all over, usually they're in large clusters. If I see one, usually I see 20. But those are our whirligig beetles, and they're named that because of those weird swim strokes they make around the water. But if you look at their larvae, they're actually quite pretty. Um, but if you have the chance, I would suggest maybe taking a baseball hat or a net and trying to catch the adult form of the whirligig beetle, because if you catch them, they release an odor, and most things, like skunks or lacewings, make really nasty smelling odors to make you go away. They actually smell kind of fruity, almost like apples. So it's pretty pleasant. So that's another way to get you into nature. This one, water pennies are interesting because they're a beetle, but their larval form is kind of nondescript. If you go to look for things in the water and you start flipping rocks, you might see a worm-shaped or a mid-shaped, the kind of elongated bodies, but these really are pretty oval and they stick flat to the rocks. So when you flip it over, you have to look pretty closely because they're not going to be moving around too much. But once you find them, you know you have something special because these are really not tolerant to pollution. So if they're there, that means your waterway is healthy. So that's exciting to find. And I have found these in Shaw Woods as well. Okay. Stoneflies. Now we're getting into things that have lots of legs, some antenna, and tails and or gills at the end. So I kind of use those words interchangeably. What we can see with our stonefly, right? Not all of them have this brilliant of a coloration, but this is from a slide, so they have a light underneath it, so you can really see that detail. But they're known, they have these 6 legs because they are insects, but the two projections coming out at the end. And we can use the number of projections to kind of differentiate between the things that we're seeing as we go forward. Like mayflies, right? So mayflies have those 3 projections at the end, but they're cool because you can see these gills coming out of the side. And when we talk about mayflies, if you live in Northeast Ohio, you know that they're coming out right now, right? Especially if you ever go up to Lake Erie, they all emerge at once. And that can be in the thousands, especially if you're in a big body of water like Lake Erie. So all the adults are going to emerge at once, and they can be in the thousands, and then they just kind of take over, right? I've been in Put in Bay, I've been at Cedar Point when these all come up, and they cover everything. They cover the side of the building, they cover the road. We've been driving in a golf cart. You can just hear them crunch because there's so many underneath. But their only job is to reproduce. So they're not born, but they come out in their adult form without mouth parts and they reproduce and then they die. And in that meantime, they feed so many birds and fishes. So it's a good day in the summer if you're a bird or a fish when the mayflies come out, but not so much if you're a human trying to enjoy a nice summer day. If you don't recognize them as this part, then you're probably going to recognize them when they look like this, right? So this is the mayfly that we mostly see if you're up on the lake. They have these wings. You might also have heard them called a Canadian soldier. And I know they're out because we just had a program at Garrettsville Summerfest on Saturday, and we had this tub with water in it, and we actually attracted a mayfly. So that was cool to show the kids If you grab it lightly by the wings to show them, then they kind of whip this tail back and forth. It doesn't really do anything, but it makes them look a little bit scarier, right? There we go. Okay. So here is a mayfly that we sampled out of um, a creek in Shaw Woods. You can see it's missing two of its legs, but it does have all three of its tails back there. But along the side, do you see these things moving? Those are its gills, right? And I think they are the coolest creatures to observe. You have these huge eyes, but when they come out, they're not as pleasant. So I'd much rather see them here in the water than, you know, up on land in their adult form. Okay. Another pleasant thing to come across as an adult around the water are damselflies. They come in a huge variety of colors and they can really be beautiful. If you can get your hands on a dragonfly or damselfly book, I suggest you start looking at these creatures because they're stunning. One of my favorite damselflies is an ebony jewelwing. So if you can Google ebony jewelwing, you'll see one of the prettiest insects out there. Most people are able to recognize them, but they don't necessarily know them in their nymph stage. So here we see they're an insect. They have our six legs, they have their body segments, but then we have these three projections at the end. Notice they have the same amount of projections as the mayfly do, but they don't have those noticeable external gills like we just noticed or observed on the last one. With our dragonflies, I think if I had to pick a favorite, these guys would be my favorite because they're so close to aliens, and it just boggles my mind that there's anything this cool on Earth. But you can see this person is holding this dragonfly nymph and putting their fingernail near the bottom of their face. That's because dragonflies have this bottom jaw called a labium, and they sit on the bottom of the river or the stream or the creek, wherever they are, and they wait for food to pass by. And if one gets within grabbing distance, they shoot out this bottom jaw, grab whatever is passing in front of them, some unfortunate creature, and pulls it back into them without even moving their arms. They could use their jaw as a, this retractable um, feeding device, which is very alien-like. Okay, so if you were to look at the rest of this creature, you can see this one's a little bit farther along in its development. You can see its kind of wing cases are right there. Obviously, they don't need wings when they're underwater, but they definitely do after they come out. Okay, and that's why I think they hold the title of alien on Earth, because those dragonfly nymphs are going to crawl out onto a piece of grass at night under the cover of darkness, so they're safer. The back is going to split, and the adult dragonfly is going to crawl out of it. And you can see this adult has been here. Usually, like if we look here, see their wings are all folded up inside. They need a couple of hours to pump that hemolymph into their wings so they can stretch out and harden, and then they're able to take flight. So they're pretty susceptible to predators and getting hit by things for a couple of hours, but once their wings harden, then they're on their way. You might be able to see these little white strings that are attaching, this is called an exuvia, the old exoskeleton. You might be able to see these white strings attached, that exuvia, to the adult form. Those are its tracheal tubes, so that's how it was breathing before. So if that doesn't convince you that they're aliens, I don't know what is. Another fun thing to do during the day, obviously, observe the dragonflies and damselflies. But if you walk around and look at the aquatic vegetation that's poking out, you might be able to find an exuvia that's sitting there. So you can pick it up. It's like a lot like a cicada, if you have encountered those in the summer, where they leave their exoskeletons everywhere. You can pick it off, and then you can see what the dragonfly looked like before it came into its adult form. Okay. If you don't know the difference, I did want to separate dragons from damsels. Or dragonflies, when they land like airplanes. So their wings sit straight out from their body. And a damselfly, when they land, they're going to have their wings folded up over their back. So that's one of the easy ways to tell the difference. And usually damselflies are smaller as well. Okay, so we said in the beginning, what's the point? And the point is to use them as bioindicators to help us determine the health of a waterway. And not only do we do that, but the state does that as well. Many states, I'm assuming. But when we talk about stream quality monitoring, excuse me, we use these macroinvertebrates to assess stream health and identify potential issues. So if you remember that spectrum I showed you in the beginning, some are a little bit more tolerant of pollution, some are not as tolerant. If we can count the different types of organisms and how many there are of each, that can give us an indication of how healthy our waterway is. And then if we're seeing changes over time, then we can also identify potential issues as well. So this is a form that the state of Ohio uses, specifically Ohio Department of Natural Resources and our Scenic Rivers program. Excuse me, but you'll use the information at the top is just identifier information. But what we're really concerned about is this box right here, right? Oh, hold on. So if you see this macroinvertebrate tally, it has a couple of the ones we talked about: water flies, mayflies, stoneflies, dobson flies, and then if you get to group 2, beetle, crayfish, scuds, blackfly, aquatic, and midge. So group 1, those are the ones that are less tolerant to pollution. They like clean waterways. Group 3 are more tolerant. That's why we see all those aquatic worms and the black flies and the midges. They can tolerate pollution a little bit better than other things. In group 3, like our damselflies and dragonflies, are somewhere in the middle. Okay, and how many of these taxa we find and how many of each we find can give us an indication whether that waterway is excellent, good, fair, or poor. Okay, so that's this worksheet in a nutshell. And I thought it would be interesting if we could do it together. So I have made a little string, and it looks a little silly because there are a lot of worms. So they're in straight lines. When you sample them, you're not going to see them in straight lines. But let's go through, excuse me, and count them and then see what we come up with. Okay, so if we're here, how many adult beetles do you see? And the adult beetles are the larger black creatures. Let's see, do I have a laser? Try to count those while I figure out this laser situation. There we go. All right. So adult beetles. If you counted 6, you are correct. Good job. So we'd go back and put that on our form. Next, let's count the crawfish, crayfish, crawdads, whatever you want to call them. So this long one right here and here, those are crawfish. So how many do you count there? If you counted 4, you're correct. Let's try the black fly larva. Remember, those are the cute ones, the little cheerleaders of the water, their little pom-pom heads. How many do you count? I believe there's 12. So you got 12, good job. What about the scuds? Remember, the scuds are the goofy looking side swimmers, the little shrimp that can't swim, right? So how many scuds do you see? There are 6 of those. Oop, spoiler alert. I guess I didn't give you a chance to count the beetle larva. There are 2 of those there, a little bit bigger. I guess I should say these things are not to size, but you probably figured that out by now. And then the clams are these shelled things. Obviously, ours aren't that big, and they're a little bit smoother than this, but I couldn't find a clear picture for this activity. There are only two. And then I'm gonna just need you to trust me that there are over 100 aquatic worms. Okay, I'm not gonna put you through that. So if we take that same form, here's the numbers we came up with. So we have our riffle beetle adult. There were 6 of them, right? And if you use this little key here, if there's between 1 and 9 of the organism, it gets an A. If it's between 10 and 99, it's a B. And if it's over 100, it's a C. Okay, so since we only had 6 riffle beetles, that's under 9, it gets an A. Beetle larvae, there were only 2. Crayfish, there were only 4. Scuds, there were 6. And clams, there were 2. So all of those also get an A because they're under 9. The black fly larva had 12, so that falls in this 10 to 99 range, means it gets a B. And then our aquatic worms, there were over 100 of them, and that gets a C. Okay, so that doesn't necessarily contribute to our cumulative index value, but it does give us an idea of how many of each we're finding, kind of this visual clue. Then you add them up. There was only 1 in group 1 taxa, and that's worth 3 units. So 1 times 3 is 3. I'm sure you guys are all handling this math just fine. Here we had 4, and group 2 is worth 2. So 4 times 2 is 8. And then our group 3 taxa, there were 2 groups here, and they're only worth 1, right? Remember, we expect to find them a lot of places. So that's 2. So 3 plus 8 plus 2 should equal 13, okay? And when you look at this stream quality index rating, we have a cumulative index value of 13, which is between 11 and 16. So for this made-up waterway, our sampling showed that it is fair, okay? There are ways that we could do better, right? We could remove toxins or pollutions. Maybe other things would start to move in and we could slowly move up, right? But at least we're not poor, I guess, in this made-up scenario. Okay. This is a little commercial I wanted to put in. If you liked that activity, I know we went through it kind of fast. If you have any questions, let me know. But that activity is kind of drawn out for students in our teacher totes. So if you didn't know, we have teacher totes on ecology, but also on geology. We have a new one that Kent State helped us with, and you can check them out to use, whether you're a classroom teacher or a homeschool teacher or a librarian. If you deal with students in any capacity and you want to share ecology or geology with them, we have them. And in the ecology one specifically is that activity, but it's in the form of a project-based learning activity, so a PBL, if you're familiar with that. So if you are a teacher, if you know a teacher that would find that useful, send me an email and we can get it to you once school starts, I'm assuming. Okay, so why is this all relevant? Why did we waste our time going through that activity? It's because people are doing that in real life. So you might have heard of the Scenic River program. It's been going on for many decades, and the Upper Cuyahoga was determined to be a state scenic river in the 70s. So it's been clean for a very long time, and we figured that out by using this cumulative index value score. So you can see the Upper Cuyahoga starts in Geauga, runs down through Portage, right? All of these cities I'm sure you're familiar with. We do a lot of sampling at Manaway, right there at Booker Park, right? But they use this same form, okay? And at the end of the year, they can publish the monitoring report. And there's a lot of information, but what I want to focus on is what we just did, because there are volunteers out there actively doing this every single year on most of the rivers throughout the state. Okay, so in 2022, for the Upper Cuyahoga River, they found water pennies, which is exciting. Look how many taxa they found just in the sensitive group, that group 1. And obviously, if things that are sensitive to pollution can live there, then things that are tolerant to pollution can definitely live there, right? So when they added this up, they got a cumulative index value of 27, which is excellent, right? So that's incredible. So that our Upper Cuyahoga that runs right here through Portage County continuously gets this assessment rating of excellent. just based on these macroinvertebrates that you've learned about. If you want to join us and do these activities and see how they're done in real life, we do them a couple of times throughout the summer. The next two coming up in July, we have a summer stream exploration where we go to Shaw Woods and get in the stream and look for these macroinvertebrates and fill out the form. And then we also have on July 23rd a river health workshop where we partner with Akron Watershed Division and we go in the river at Booker Park, assuming the water is at a safe level. You can see this was a picture from last summer. This was a mom and her son. They were using a D net to sample what was below, and they were looking in to see if they had anything. Pictures from our summer stream exploration. If we're at Shaw Woods, this is what we're doing, right? We take maybe about a 15-minute walk down to the creek. There's a nice bridge right there. If you're familiar with Shaw Woods, I'm sure you've walked over this bridge before. But we use these seines here. You can see I have all these little kiddos washing rocks and helping get the little things, macroinvertebrates off and into this net. And then we fold it up, put it on the bridge. And then we have volunteers. The kids are helping. They're sorting through all of this in order to see what's living there, right? Then we fill out that form and we can get our own cumulative index value, that CIV, to tell us how good it's doing. So we'll be doing that in July as well. Okay, if you saw those photos I put in, and I kind of already talked up macroinvertebrates.org, but this is a great resource to go and learn these things, to quiz yourself, to learn about the different families that are in there. But they also have a great app called Pocket Macros, which is free. There's flashcards on there. They have the dichotomous key. They have really good in-depth photos so that you can start to learn to identify the different critters that we just talked about. And with that, we've come to the end. So I want to thank you for hanging out with me on Monday. I hope your summer is going really well, and I really hope to see you at one of these programs so that you can take your new knowledge about macroinvertebrates and come help us identify all the cool things we're seeing. So thank you and have a good night.